Hi, you guys. Welcome back to Meaningful Motivations with Tracy Erickson. And of course, if you are new to this channel, welcome. My name is Tracy Erickson, and in this video, I'm going to talk about real vampire stories out of New Orleans, Louisiana. And these stories span across centuries. So stay tuned. New Orleans, Louisiana is a very peculiar city, in my opinion. It has this intrigue about it, with a mixture of merriment and black magic, as well as just things that happen in the darkness. While I've always been very interested in the mysterious, darker side of the city of New Orleans, I've never visited the city myself. I also love reading about and hearing stories from people who have been there and people who live there. And so one day, as I was scrolling along on the internet, I came across this woman who claims that she is an Uber driver, and she picked someone up one night in her car who turned out to be a vampire who fed off of her energy. In her story, while giving someone a ride through Uber, she actually had an experience where a woman who claimed to be a vampire actually fed off of her energy. And so within her story, she ended up telling how it happened. She said that the self-proclaimed vampire woman simply placed her hands on the back of the driver. And at that time, the driver felt as though she was frozen in time and simply suspended in animation. She said that she noticed her hands were on the steering wheel, but the car wasn't actually going anywhere. It's as if time had frozen. In the end, the vampire woman in the back seat ended up letting her know that she just fed off of her energy. And she let her know that there are many different types of vampires in New Orleans.
She told me that there are vampires that survive off of good energy. There are vampires that survive off of bad energy. There are vampires that survive off of sexual energy. And there are vampires that survive off of blood. And New Orleans is the only place in the world where you can find members of all four of those vampire tribes.
And then I saw another story from two women who claimed to have gained entry into a very secretive vampire bar. And when they got there, they climbed up to a rooftop bar with a balcony overlooking the French Quarter down below. And within the story, one of the women claimed that one of the head vampires within this secret vampire bar actually stood on the balcony with her and pointed out specific people in the crowd down below who he would then focus on and drain the energy from. This woman claims that while she watched this vampire focus on a very specific person, that person would then become confused. It actually was visually apparent that something suddenly drained these people's energy. So within those two accounts of encounters with real vampires in New Orleans, neither one of them actually sucked blood from the victim of the energy drain. What they were draining from these individuals was their vital life force energy. The first story was with physical contact through the hand and touching of the back. And the second story, it was simply through an extreme focus on one particular individual down below, and then draining the energy simply by concentrating on that individual. I find that to be very scary because it seems as though these New Orleans energy vampires are simply feeding on people without their consent. I even found online that Louisiana has a law that states that vampires must get permission before biting their victims. I actually looked it up a little further, and Louisiana does have laws against certain types of ritualistic sacrifice and the drinking of blood and other bodily fluids. There are many people in New Orleans who believe that they are vampires in one way or another. And they have friends who are vampires, support groups for vampires. They even have vampire-themed bars and restaurants and shops within the city of New Orleans. But it could be because New Orleans has a long history of vampires. Vampire stories go all the way back to the first settlers of Louisiana. In fact, one of the more popular vampire stories is of the Casket Girls of New Orleans. So historically speaking, a casket girl or a pelican girl was a woman who was brought from France to the French colonies of Louisiana to marry one of the men there. And the name casket girl is derived from those small chests that were known as caskets that they carried their personal belongings in. Eventually, the word casket kind of transformed into the word casket, which is kind of reminiscent of a coffin or casket, like for death. But basically, the casket girls are said to be vampires in New Orleans folklore because there's legends that claim that they carried vampires in these little sealed trunks. And some legends say that they were vampires themselves. And then there's the legend of Jacques Saint Germain, who is said to have moved from France to New Orleans back in 1902. And within a story that I found about him on pelicanstateofmind.com, it says, not long after he had taken up residence in New Orleans, things got creepy quickly. There's a tale told by many vampire enthusiasts in the Big Easy that one night Jacques invited a woman over to his house for a party. After a while, he asked her up to the balcony where he attempted to bite her neck. She freaked out and escaped by jumping off the balcony onto the pavement below. The story goes that the terrified woman had drops of blood trickling down her neck. People quickly surrounded her and called the police. When the police arrived to investigate, they found something that made their blood run cold. In Jacques' home, they found clothes from all different time periods, stained in blood. There was absolutely no food or utensils in the house. Bottles of what seemed to be red wine, but were in fact human blood, filled the cabinets. What they didn't find was Jacques Saint Germain, who never returned. And there's also the famous story of the Carter brothers from 1932. On yesterdaysamerica.com, it told the story of the Carter brothers. In 1932, a young girl stormed down Royal Street, visibly panicked, her stride broken only by the diligent interception of a police officer. Her story sounded a bit far-fetched. Tied up by two brothers, along with several other victims, and held captive so the brothers could drink their blood. The girl claimed that she was only able to escape due to the captors' carelessness in securing her ropes. Somewhat skeptical, the police agreed to follow her back to the home on the corner of Royal and St. Anne. Once the police and the girl arrived at the home, which was owned by the Carter brothers, they were horrified to find, as the girls had described, 4 victims, half dead, tied to chairs in one of the rooms. All victims had their wrists wrapped with bandages, moist and stained with blood. 2 more bodies were wrapped in blankets and were tucked away in another room. The unmistakable, suffocating odor of death permeated the apartment. It seemed the brothers left early each morning just before daybreak and returned every single evening just after dark. Immediately upon their return, they would take the bandages off of each of the captives' wrists and, using a knife, reopen their wounds until blood flowed freely from the victims' cuts. They caught the blood in cups from which they drank until their hunger was sated. The brothers would then redress the wounds with fresh bandages. They spoke very little and gave no concern for their victims' well-being. Unaware that the girl had escaped, John and Wayne Carter went about their routine as usual. Only this time, the police waited for the brothers to return. They were quickly apprehended and upon their capture, confessed almost immediately. Begging to be murdered, the brothers explained to authorities that they were in fact vampires and would, if released, have no option but to continue to kill, as their need for drinking blood was beyond their control. It is said the brothers were tried as serial killers, and they were convicted and eventually executed. With all of these vampire stories going around, one thing is for certain. If you visit New Orleans, be sure to stay vigilant and be aware of your surroundings and aware of the people you are coming into contact with all the time. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you believe in these real vampire stories out of New Orleans? Or do you think that these are just urban legends that have been exaggerated? In my life, I've seen many strange and unusual things. I've even had very strange and unusual spiritual experiences myself throughout my entire life. So in my opinion, I think it is possible that there are certain types of vampires out there. You just never really know. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. So if you like this video, be sure to click that like button. And if you want to see more content like this from me, then be sure to subscribe to Meaningful Motivations with Tracy Erickson and turn on that notifications bell if you would like to be notified each and every time I upload a new video. Thank you guys so much for watching and spending your time with me. I love you. And I'll see you next time. Bye.